Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 10th Education Committee meeting of the board. Before we get started, I'd like to ask if anyone would like to come and speak on an agenda item only. If so, please sign in with Ms. LaPera. There'll be opportunity to speak to any item at the end of the meeting. Okay, then with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McGinley.
And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Marseille. We
Okay.
we have three reports to give this evening, and I'm sure there'll be some interest in each of the reports and some questions following up, but I actually am not part of any of those three reports.
I will continue the theme of passing the baton and pass the baton to Dr. Doria, who will provide you with a brief update on the work that's been taking place with instructional time and some of the resolutions that have taken place and some areas that we continue to work on.
So good evening. Thank you in advance. Some of you have heard me speak to this topic a few times, so thank you for your smiles as we go through it again. Okay. Which one? Yep, see, not my computer, thanks. Just a little refresher of what brought us to this instructional time committee work that we did this year. As we know, last year there was some conversations and work, much work, done around the schedule and really looking at time and our best way to serve our students. And there was some unresolved concerns about the time, and administration was intentional enough to say, let's join a committee together in the fall to work on those issues of time in the elementary school schedule. So we were able to have a committee with members from the schools, administration, various committees, and the HSA representatives, and LMEA. And we met for 7 sessions to really address the concerns of not having enough instructional time and being very targeted in identifying time for certain subjects. We had some celebrations and were able to come up with some great discoveries, and then we have some areas that we still need to continue to explore and much work to do. So some of the discoveries that came from the sessions with the committee was an understanding of the importance of win time, which is what I need, which is an intervention and enrichment period where there's no new instruction and students are able to get what they need. So if a student needs a little additional help to catch up on a subject, or a student wants to stretch and grow with extensions, that's that opportunity for that to happen. Another discovery that surfaced through the work of the Instructional Time Committee was the celebration of and challenge with our instructional music program. We have nearly 80% of our 4th and 5th graders participating in instrumental music on a one-to-one basis and in small groups, which is wonderful. But what we realized with the time factor was that all of those students then are being pulled out of their classrooms to have this one-to-one time or small group time. And through conversations and through our survey, we realized that we weren't systematic in having that happen across all 6 elementary schools. For example, some schools had certain subjects where we did not pull out for instrumental music, and other schools rotated it throughout the cycle in both ways. So we had some conversation realizing that we had to have some consistency with that. We realized too that writing was another topic or area that was addressed differently across the elementary schools, and we had rich conversation about teaching the craft of writing as opposed to writing for response to reading and writing in response to thinking. And they're all very important, but making sure that we were aware of the teaching of the craft of writing and finding time for that. And then another big piece really ties in with the music, but a little bit greater, is the biggest crunch for time, as opposed to across all grade levels. It surfaced through the survey and through the conversations in the committee that 4th and 5th grade were the grades that really had the highest challenge of identifying enough time in their schedules for the instructional purposes of the day. With the music pullouts, with the high number of students that we can celebrate that are in our challenge program, and lots of other activities that happen with plays and performances and projects and activities. I'm not going to read this all to you, so we can exhale, but I wanted to make sure that I honored the actual words that the committee came up with for their recommendations. So we want to make sure that this is posted on the website, and I want to address the topics briefly. So the committee's work came up with, I think it's 11 very intentional recommendations. And one focuses on increasing the co-curricular activities among and between subjects. Another was the win time, an agreement of 30 to 45 minutes of win time per week. Maximizing push-ins versus pull-outs, and there was a lot of conversation about that in our scheduling, and discussions of alternate models of delivery for instrumental music instruction. The committee had a recommendation for looking at writing by developing a working core group of teachers and administrators to unpack and address the teaching of writing as a craft. Two that go together but are separate. Throughout all 7 sessions, there was a realization and conversation about the difference within our little group of 6 schools, the size and the need for staff, and some school-specific challenges that we might have. So we wanted to make sure that we were aware of that in decisions that we made. There was a recommendation to explore an alternating schedule of 5 days and then 6 days, really an 11-day schedule from the committee. And then the committee really wanted to address the fact that the earlier start time and the shorter morning meetings that were implemented this school year were positive, and they celebrated those. What we did as a leadership team, the elementary leadership team, was looked at the recommendations of the committee and said, what are some district level actions that we could take to support those recommendations, and then, what are any district level recommendations that we might have based on that. So looking at the win time, and we described that as targeted instruction with no new curriculum at the time and reinforcement of skills. And the action that we can take and will take next year is that, and we've worked with the principals on this and set up our meetings to plan our schedules, is to ensure that every elementary school has win time at least 3 times a week for 30 to 45 minutes, and expands for the grades of 1 through 5. Because currently, some schools have win, or they call it PI, for some grades or some of the time. So we wanted to make sure that we were consistent and provided that intervention and enrichment for all students, that we would need that. Another recommendation, again, that the committee had was really looking at our pulling out for music and our music schedule, and considering alternate models. And what we did as a elementary leadership team was to look at this a little bit more deeply and work with our principals in our scheduling, and as I said, we've set up several meetings already for the spring to really be very deliberate and intentional with our scheduling, especially when we share staff, and really looking to see. The second piece is making sure that we have the pullouts for the lessons that occur throughout all subject areas. So we have no particular subject that you can't pull out for a class. And then to continue to look at alternate models of delivery and exploring other districts and across the country, or what are the best ways to address teaching the music in this fashion. A little bit different from the recommendation, but supporting it wholeheartedly. The committee suggested that we build a core working group, and we are very lucky to have a core working group of some really solid educators right here at the elementary team. So we sat down and looked at the schedules, looked at the teaching of writing, looked at the resources we had available, and we were able to ensure that future elementary schedules will approach writing by teaching the craft of writing, and really looking at 30 minutes out of that literacy block and being very intentional in scheduling that. Because sometimes if you just call it literacy and then you begin to write in response or do journal writing, which is all very important, we step away from the actual teaching of writing. And then the second piece of that, scoring of that with the teachers. And the final piece that we're looking at was not attached to a recommendation from the committee, although the committee did vote on this. It was a 50-50 split, and we really needed 2/3 for that recommendation to go through. But unpacking it with the principals and the elementary team and looking at the challenges that we have in 4th and 5th grade, we have a recommendation with the curriculum committee of the board to have FLES for 4th and 5th grade be 60 minutes a week as opposed to 90 minutes a week, and to try to minimally impact that number of minutes throughout the whole elementary experience. We're looking at putting 30 minutes in the 1st grade program, which would be a new adventure to stretch that along. And again, that's going to be presented in more detail at the curriculum committee of the board, and really looking at what would the 4th and 5th grade program look like, and what would we do with 1st grade, since that would be new? What skills would be taught? There are some concerns that we have not yet addressed that were part of the charge of the committee, and it was really identifying the uninterrupted whole class instructional time. We spent lots of time talking about that, but we're not able to solve that challenge. And additionally, we were not able to secure across all elementary schools and through the schedule, that adequate time that we need to allot for social studies and science. So we look forward to continued work and conversation to address those challenges. And additionally, we want to thank from our hearts the hard work, dedication, and support of every member of the Instructional Time Committee. It was a long process and a lot of work, and we are pleased with the progress that we've made, and we look forward to continued success.
Thank you very much, Dr. Doria. Even though we've heard it recently, we pick up more things every time we hear it. So I think on behalf of the entire board as well, we'd like to thank the administration and also all of the parents and teachers and who were involved in the committee, because I know the committee met often and for long periods of time. Absolutely. And so we really do, I think we all appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yes, so with that, I'd like to open it up to questions by board members.
And just a note, which we did review at the curriculum committee, the one issue that's a board level or curriculum committee decision now is around the recommendation for the change in FLES. The other things that the committee recommended and that we outlined in terms of implementation are things that we can do administratively, but the FLES part is the curricular change that's recommended. So it's a package of issues that do improve the instructional time, and FLES is part of that, but it's not, the FLES part doesn't whatever happens to FLES doesn't change the other work that's going to happen moving forward. Right. And so, as your next to last slide says, if we get this FLES part in, it's a significant step in the right direction. If we don't get the FLES part in, it's less significant.
Can I just follow up on that before I come up with you? So I just want to be clear that the FLES recommendation, which I realize it needs to go through the whole board process. So, but if that is implemented, or if it isn't implemented, does that affect sort of science and social studies, or is that sort of, in other words, we said that we still have concerns around science and social studies, and I think it's important for people to realize that, and that we're making choices, and we've heard public input into those choices, but they are choices. Right. Does the FLES issue go at all towards addressing that, or is it?
It does. I mean, for a teacher to have an extra half hour of instructional time every week for the entire year, it gives us more minutes to use for social studies and science.
I realize we'll be talking about this in more detail. I just wanted to try and get an understanding of sort of what the relationship was. So, are there other, Robin?
Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Doria, and thank you to the full team and the community for supporting such a comprehensive process. I wanted to raise a question around the writing process and get a sense of what that should look like with the intentional time as we look at considering narrowing the time for FLES, and what should elementary schoolers be doing in terms of the writing process and that development?
Absolutely. And just, again, to be clear, and I don't, want to say again, writing happens all the time.
Right.
And so we want to not say that we haven't been doing writing, because we respond to thinking, we respond to our reading. But we want to be intentional in teaching the craft of writing. So if it's a descriptive paragraph, if it's a persuasive essay, that students really understand how to craft that piece in a very systematic way, and that they're able to also use a rubric to guide them in their work, so that they can see what the highest level is and areas for growth.
Great. And then, so our fifth graders take the writing PSSA, is that
Correct.
correct? So is their process somewhat different, or what goes on in fourth and fifth grade different in terms of the development of that writing process toward proficiency and advance?
Absolutely, because they're more advanced writers, and the length of their piece has to be much longer.
Okay.
And they're purposeful planning, so they learn how to brainstorm and concept map prior to writing, and then going back and checking that, and then using their rubric as well.
Okay. And you said there's already a team in place to start the conversation of what that will look like to support
Oh,
teachers in the
absolutely.
classroom. Great, thank you.
Can you explain how this will affect the literacy block in the program as we run it now?
Sure, and it won't, because we have that time is built in to our 120 minutes, but it's being focused on the type of writing. So, for example, sometimes teachers are heavy on journal writing, which is a wonderful thing to do, but they'll say, their 30 minutes of writing may be top heavy with journal writing, or top heavy with descriptive paragraphs, or whatever their or response to thinking, and they use that 30 minutes in that way. And it's fine to blend that in, but to be really aware of teaching how to craft a descriptive paragraph, or how to follow a rubric with your writing, as opposed to just kind of free writing.
I also wanted to commend all the work and the leadership and the stakeholder engagement that resulted in, I think, a really great outcome. And I'm very excited now for our strategic planning process, because I think we have initiated something similar in just this little effort, and that should lead to great outcomes. I thought it was great that Dr. McGinley sent a communication out district-wide to all the parents. I also think it's probable that not everyone read it completely and processed it and understood everything in there. So just maybe a suggestion that a little extra communication, maybe through the HSAs and some of the other kind of in-school groups, to make sure that it's communicated again, even from the principals, because I know this was a topic of high interest last year, and I just think it would be great for everyone to understand really how it was resolved. So,
Okay, thank you.
One of the reasons why we did this tonight was to also make sure that people had a place to go to,
See it.
to see it.
Right.
And to see the
Great.
presentation, and that this PowerPoint will be posted. And I'm shocked to think that letters go out that people don't read thoroughly.
frustrating as
Yeah.
it may be. It was a wonderful letter.
Thank you.
First, thank you, and it was really nice to hear you say you're going to be working on this in the spring, because that implies that we are going to have spring.
That's right. We are.
I just wanted a little bit, as I remember last year, and I realize you weren't here for the initial conversations, but the uninterrupted class time was one of the drivers for the process. And so do you have any ideas of how you're going to now build that in?
So we have, I don't know if you,
I think there are a couple things. One is the more that people talked about what went on in the course of the day, the less likely it seemed that we could ever come up with really pure periods of time. And so one of the pushes is with that, where the win time is identifiable, is that to the extent that we can, we put as much in there as possible. So I think that the teacher survey, the conversations that you had in the committee meeting, help people understand how complicated the scheduling is, and how many programs and services occur either through push-in or pull-out. And so I think we had a better sense of what was realistic and what was not. So again, back to the last slide about a step in the right direction. It's a step in the right direction that every grade will have win time in every school, and that it's designated in the schedule, so we can use that as the target. That's the place to go for as many things as we can put there. But we can't put everything there,
No.
and we really can't do that in any grade, right?
No.
Okay, well, again, thank you very
Thank you.
much, and we look forward to hearing more in the curriculum committee shortly.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to start by giving part of my short presentation this evening. The first phase is to give you an update on where we are with the comprehensive plan. We gave a short update last board meeting with regards to the work that was going to take place, and I want to share with you where we are around that particular process. Last board meeting, we spoke about the work around identifying what the state requires as the minimum participants for the steering committee. We expressed as a district that we were committed to having much more than that 16 number. So what we've done so far is that the 16 members that are required based on PDE regs have been identified. The leadership team made up of those particular representatives. Board of Directors identified 6. LMEA chose 6 other teachers and sent those recommendations to me. The educational specialists, psychologists, social workers, and others got together, identified 2 individuals that they wanted represented as members of the steering committee, and administration identified 2 individuals, and that is the minimum requirement that the state sets forth with regards to a steering committee. In 2009, we exceeded that number. We were close to 69 individuals that were invited. Very large steering committee, to say the least. Most individuals argue that the number should hover around 35 and 40, but that number will be much larger in terms of that 45. So leadership team that has been working on trying to think about the ways in which to lead this conversation, trying to frame their protocols into place, the questions that are going to be asked. Those individuals have been meeting once or twice a month to try to put together a way in which we're going to present this to the community. So I want to thank them for their work, but it's not over. We're just in the beginning stages of this particular process. So there's been questions around the idea about how do I participate? And Doug Young and I are in the process of drafting a letter to the community explaining the comprehensive planning process, inviting individuals who would be willing to sit on the steering committee with an understanding that is a limited number of seats that are available. But I said to the board and to the public many times before that we are doing something vastly different than we did in 2009. And we understood that that steering committee, as powerful as it is, there need to be more voice in the process. So we are conducting surveys for the first time, where we'll have student surveys, faculty surveys, and community surveys that we are very optimistic that for those dates identified would be the dates that those surveys would go live and individuals would be able to participate. So that's one area of focus. And what's great about the student survey is that we sat around the table and we said, you know, we have a whole bunch of adults thinking questions about what high school should look like or what school should look like. Wouldn't it be a great idea to involve our middle school and high school students in the conversation and ask them to help us formulate questions about the future of schooling and what would be the best questions to ask your classmates? The schools are currently finalizing that process. Each building has had 2 meetings so far. I have to say that, and a special thanks to John Fadley at Lower Marion High School. I happened to attend both of the meetings where he brought together 21 of the most intellectual, gifted, 20 diverse group of students, and who did some really powerful work. Matter of fact, they might be the leadership team right then and there, if you had the opportunity to listen to them. So we asked them to help us think of questions. They came up with 75 questions under 5 broad categories that they believed, as a high school student, spoke volumes to what they want to see change. Instruction, technology, engagement, extracurricular activities and community service, and the schedule. And under each of those, they put 15 to 20 questions that they said, these are the things we're thinking about. Please consider these as possible questions. In addition to that, they decided that they wanted to create a climate survey. So they attached 59 additional questions saying, these would be great questions to ask high school students because we haven't been asked these questions before. So I want to thank them for their work, and we're looking forward to the feedback from the great work that Harrington students are doing, the great work that the Welsh Valley and the BC group are doing as well. So they've done a great service for their school by providing us some really top-level questions. So surveys are one area in which we're going to have communication. Faculty surveys will be up by the week of March 24th, and community surveys. That'll give individuals the opportunity to go on our website and take that survey and give their feedback. And then we talked about this idea about having focus groups, wanting to have the opportunity for school and community involvement. And right now, what you're seeing is a preliminary list of focus group conversations that have already been scheduled. There are additional community and school organizations that are not on that list that we are finalizing meetings with. So if you look on that list, we have a series of school-related focus group discussions with academic council, which is made up of all the administrators in this district, principals, assistant principals, directors. We have CIPD, which is made up of our teachers around curriculum instruction and professional development. The principals at the schools have dedicated specific time during faculty meetings to allow teachers to engage in this conversation as well and to listen and solicit their feedback. Some of those dates are up there, but others are pending. Then you'll see that other community organizations that have committed to us, who've been really gracious and giving us an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, to engage their constituents in the conversation. You'll see that our tomorrow, myself, Doug Young, and Brian Cody and Dr. Wexler will be at the academic building for an hour and 30 minutes with ISC, walking through and providing opportunity for small group discussion around those particular areas. So we're really excited to get started with the focus conversations. During the month of March and April is going to be a really large data collection. We're going to collect all that information. We're going to synthesize that. And part of the work that the steering committee will do is from there we're going to unpack 4 or 5 major areas that we believe as a community we would like to move forward with. In addition to that, we are in the final drafts of our communication plan. So that will be up available on our website relatively soon, detailing the process we're going to go through. So we're really happy with where we are now. We are going to, Doug and I are going to draft a letter to the community, further detailing the steps that are going to take place and asking individuals for their to volunteer or their interest in being part of the steering committee. But once again, I have to stress that it's a limited number of our participants, but everyone will have an opportunity or a voice throughout this conversation. So we're really excited with that. If there's any questions, I'll take them before I move on to the next topic. Yes.
This is good information, and my question as usual, for those persons who do not have access to a computer and the community survey, have provisions been made for them to access or to receive a survey?
Yes, we will when the surveys go live, and part of the conversation with community leaders is identifying key areas where we can give hard copy access to those particular surveys, where there'll be a drop-off point where over a period of weeks, those surveys will be available, and our leadership team will go out to those community centers or those areas and pick them up and do that. So we will make sure that for those who, for whatever reason, may not either want to or don't have access to the technology, that we'll give hard copies as well.
I have two questions about the scheduling, and one is I've already heard from a number of working parents who can't make the ISC meeting, and is there going to be any evening meeting that's open to just regular parents? I've got a number of calls about people who can't attend at 9:30 on a Tuesday.
Yes, yes, and that's a good recommendation that we are proposing and bringing up for discussion with the leadership team. I have to tell you that we did not think about having an evening meeting. We definitely will put that on the schedule and identify a time and date where we can do that. We were hoping that within the body of some of these organizations that we can tap as many individuals as possible, but I've heard that request from additional community members and parents. So
It somewhat biases your sample.
yes, so but we will, well, we have 24 organizations that we're going to engage in conversation with, but we definitely will make sure that we offer an evening session open to those who can't make it during those particular hours.
And then my second suggestion is just for the alumni, which I think are a really important stakeholder because they know how well prepared they were for college or where the gaps are.
Yes.
I mean, they probably get home from college in early May. I don't know if you can delay till then. They're probably on spring break around now, so that may be too late to catch the young alums. But
Yeah.
the college-age kids would be most available if you want to do face-to-face, after their college semester is
I
over.
think there are ways in which we talked about for alum using technology and social media in a very
that would
different
probably-
way.
right.
So we have an opportunity to use that venue as well. But I think as we talk as leadership team, we will continue to be extremely flexible with regards to the opportunities that we provide individuals. We really want to make sure that we've tried to cover as many bases as possible and given as many opportunities for people to give feedback, which we will then take back to the steering committee as a collective set of data points.
And then just my last suggestion was that when you have the student questionnaires that the students have come up with, there are a number of parents in the district who write questionnaires and surveys for a living, and they probably might be able to look at those and find statistical issues like agreement bias or just ways of tweaking the wording to make those stronger social science survey questions.
Sure, I understand that.
These surveys are data to prompt additional discussion, so I don't know that it needs the analysis that would be useful in some other kinds of studies.
Yeah, that scared me. That was a question on my dissertation. I was like interview reliability on the survey questions.
Are there other questions? Go ahead.
I had a question regarding the communication that's going out. Will that be specific to the surveys, or is that going to also give a overview of the process to date?
Overview of the process to date.
Okay.
And where individuals can, where they need to go in terms of emailing myself or my office with regards to their willingness to volunteer to be part of the steering committee as well. Yes.
Will the surveys be anonymous?
Yes. We will ask for their school and their grade level, but
You won't be collecting ISPs or anything like that?
I wouldn't know how to do that, but I
In
would
the past, it's
defer
been-
that question to a technology
In
specialist.
past surveys, that's been done, and it's been a bit of a question. So it would be nice if the electronic survey was completely anonymous so that people feel free to say what they want to say.
Oh, I've never even thought that was really possible, but yeah, I'm not interested in the individual student. I'm interested in their comments. So no, it will stay anonymous, and that won't happen. Yeah.
Sorry, I thought I was on. I just wanted to ask a question about the focus groups on, I don't know which slide it is, but you have a list, oh, right there. You have
Yes,
a list of focus groups, but then you mentioned in your conversation that there were 24 groups. So is this is just a partial list?
Yes, it is. We came
Okay.
up with a very long list of individuals, but
So that's what's scheduled so far?
yes, that's what's scheduled so far.
Okay, so would it be possible for the board at some point when you're ready to show us a full list?
Sure, yes.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? So, okay, thank you. I think
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this time, I want to pass the microphone to Ms. Savage, who's going to give you an update on the special education plan.
Good evening. How are you? The Special Education Plan Subcommittee is actually a portion of the larger Comprehensive Planning Committee, and because of timelines and certain requirements, we actually had to proceed to complete the Special Education Plan prior to the Comprehensive Plan being completed. So what I'm going to give you tonight is an overview of what we have done thus far, what our timeline looks like, and the next steps as far as what we will be doing in the upcoming weeks and months to make sure that the plan is completed and compliant. So some points of interest for this evening. We're going to talk just briefly about the legal aspects of the plan, the subcommittee members, the timeline, and the plan outline itself, because this is pretty much a compliance document, and the purpose is so that the district can describe some of its special education programs, its services, but we have also, as a subcommittee, undertaken this in terms of looking at what the district could do in the next 3 years to offer more complete services to our children and make sure that we have the most inclusive environment possible. We also have subcommittee recommendations that will align with the plan outline, and we've also laid out some next steps. So first and foremost, the impact of the Chapter 4 amendments. On March 1st, the PA Bulletin, which is the legislative newspaper, so to speak, for the Pennsylvania House and their agencies, published the Chapter 4 amendments, and it amended the strategic plan requirements. And in essence, it eliminated what used to be known as the state strategic plan in favor of creating 6 different plans that together compose the comprehensive plan. So if you look at the actual legislation and how it's written, you'll see that there's different timelines for different plans, but upon the expiration of this district's strategic plan, we're responsible for creating our own new special education plan. And that special education plan is therefore required to be updated and redone every 3 years. The amendments also require something very new. There is now a 28-day public comment period as well for the special education plan, and that did not exist in the previous legislation. So the legal requirements for the special education plan, and this is pulled directly from the new amendments, require that minimum 28-day process of public comment prior to submitting it to the board for approval, and we have built that into our timeline. And an executive summary of the special education plan requirements are set forth there for you as well. There are a number of requirements that align kind of with the plan outline and the headings that the state has come up with, so that we can align what it is that we're doing as a subcommittee with the requirements in order to have the plan actually approved. The subcommittee members actually are listed on this chart, but under the state's requirements, we only needed one administrator, one special education teacher, one general education teacher, and one parent volunteer. We instead were able to secure 2 folks in each of those groups so that we have a nice rounded out committee of 8 people. We actually approached the Committee for Special Education and requested a parent volunteer. The parent volunteer in this case is the president. And we also have a representative from CARE. We have 2 special education teachers and 2 regular education teachers, and myself and Dr. Wexler. Thus far, we've had some very interesting and lively meetings. We've engaged in some very deep discussions around special education in the district, and it's been a very, very rewarding process. Here's the timeline that we had initially put together, and you can see where we have added some things and subtracted some things. The subcommittee itself has met 4 times already, and we did so because we had an initial presentation meeting where we talked about, the overall process of the special education plan and the timeline. The next few meetings, we talked about the things that we could actually impact as a subcommittee, and we have a meeting planned tomorrow as well to actually review and finalize a draft plan that we have been working at, creating the narratives and filling out the fields in the comprehensive plan that will comprise the special education plan. There's also the opportunities to speak at the board meeting noted in the timeline. I have built in the beginning of our public comment period, which will be Monday, March 24th. From there, on Monday, April 21st, our 28-day comment period will end, and we actually will do another presentation to the board at that point. We would need to submit the plan to the board for approval the following week on April 28th, and on May 1st, we actually have to submit the plan to the Bureau of Special Education, which is the state's arm for managing special education. So, the plan outline itself, which you see currently listed is the compliance pieces, the pieces that have to do with the data, the management, the space, but there's additional narrative that we as a subcommittee thought that we could affect directly in looking at where the district is going in the next 3 years, and those are LRE, which is in fact the least restrictive environment, and the idea of educating students that require special education supports and services in the least restrictive environment possible. Behavior support, making sure that we are, as a district, paying close attention to the behavior supports that we have available for all students. Strengths and highlights of the district, making sure that we highlight all of the district's strengths in its special education programming. And this was the one that drew the most attention and conversation, personnel development. The personnel development piece actually requires the district to cover autism, behavior support, paraprofessional staff, and transitions. And we had quite a bit of conversation around what that should look like. Now here for LRE, the 2 questions that are presented are the actual questions from the comprehensive and special education plan themselves. Those questions ask for descriptions. The subcommittee actually looked not only at the description piece, but also a recommendation piece as far as what, as a subcommittee, we would like to see the district do moving forward. And with respect to the least restrictive environment in particular, the subcommittee expressed interest in having the district create consistency across buildings and really strive to address student needs in the homeschool to the greatest extent possible. And quite a bit of this work has already begun and is beginning to become accomplished as we move on through the school years. We're seeing more special education services available in multiple schools. So that is definitely a focus of the subcommittee. And although the district is already extremely inclusive, looking at making the district even more inclusive through parent, professional, and student education. Behavior supports in particular, these were the 3 questions that were presented by the plan, and again, these are more descriptive. The subcommittee instead looked at implementation of school-wide behavior support and training for all staff in the area of consistent implementation of positive behavior supports. And they thought that that was going to be a great way to round out the culture and the environment in the schools that we currently see on a day-to-day basis. Our schools are very welcoming places, and they wanted to make sure that there was consistency as well for children that needed that level of routine and consistency, and positive behavior supports help with that. Continued expansion of staff training in the use of de-escalation techniques. Quite a few of the staff in the district are trained in nonviolent prevention and crisis prevention methods. This past school year, we have actually endeavored to expand the universe of people that are being trained. So now our campus aides, for example, are trained, our nurses, some of the bus drivers and bus aides. We have started to train more people in that type of nonviolent de-escalation. And also the continued expansion of crisis management, risk assessment, and mental health services. This past school year, we've added social workers, we've added mental health counselors as well, and those services have facilitated the ability to help students with some of their needs as they are in the school setting. Strengths and highlights, it really just requires us to describe ourselves as a district and what we're proud of, and the subcommittee reviewed the previous submission from 2011-14 and updated it. And last but not least, the personnel development, which we kind of looked at as a floor. These were the things that were required by the special education plan. The subcommittee actually recommended, which I found to be highly evolved, almost like a professional conference model. Most people wouldn't think of that as, the basis for professional learning in a school district, but the subcommittee members really came to the conclusion that setting up almost like a spiraling set of very deep professional learning sessions that people could participate in to deepen their knowledge across those 4 domains would be a great idea for not just special education staff, but for all staff. Also continuing the training for paraprofessionals. We have actually this year reorganized a little bit the paraprofessional training, and we've also tried to provide them with more depth in their training and their menu of options. We're also looking at creating building expertise in transitions. And by transition, I mean transition from the secondary setting to the post-secondary setting through the individualized education process, and making sure that students are that their goals address what they want to be when they grow up. And in addition, and last but not least, actually providing that in-district parent and guardian training that I think a lot of the community is seeking. This past year, we've seen the presentation with Dr. Foxman around anxiety. The ISE is actually bringing in the professional regarding sleep disorders, so making sure that we have opportunities for parents to participate in the trainings as well is extremely important to the subcommittee. For the public comment period itself, over that 28-day period, we have already set up a mechanism to receive emails regarding anyone's public plan comments. We also plan on having hard copies of the draft plan available in all buildings, and we will create a form so that any comments can be submitted right in the buildings as well. The next steps, and this is a very detailed slide, but I wanted to lay out all of the next steps so that you would have a sense of where we were going and by when. So tomorrow, March 11th, the subcommittee plans on reviewing and revising a finalized draft. That draft will be reviewed in cabinet before it will be included in the board update this week. Next week, on March 17th, I'll be able to present a more complete draft and answer any questions that you have regarding the draft that is distributed on Friday. And on March 24th, the public comment period will begin. And as we receive the public comment, whether in paper form or whether in email form, we'll make sure that you receive copies of those public comments. On April 21st, we'll have another board presentation so that the board can consider the public comment. And on April 25th, a revised draft, if necessary, will be included in the board update. And the revisions will really reflect whatever public comment has been received to that point. April 28th will be the final board review and vote. And on May 1st, we'll be submitting the plan to PDE.
Thank you very much, Ms. Savage, for the presentation. I just wanted to, I know you've pointed this out before, but I just want to make it clear to people that we have to do this part of the comprehensive plan earlier than the
Yes.
rest of it, but that the comprehensive plan is also including special education as well. So
Absolutely.
this is not, because I think it's important that this is all integrated, obviously, and I know that that's the plan, but I just thought maybe you could speak to that a little bit for people who aren't familiar with that.
Oh, absolutely. The United States Department of Education actually requires that each state educational agency, which is the state's Department of Education, submit a special education plan. And because the state is required to submit a special education plan, it requires its LEAs to do so as well. So every school district, charter school, private institution that has special education services has to provide their information to the state for purposes of compliance. And then the state will actually compile all of that information and submit it to the U.S. Department of Education, and that creates the funding mechanism. If the state does not comply and submit the information required, they don't get their money. Because in creating legislation and regulations, sometimes you don't always pay attention to everybody else's timelines. It seems as though the comprehensive planning process, though it includes the special education plan and the special education process and procedures, was allowed to flow a little later than the special education plan, primarily because of this reporting mechanism.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much. I just have one question. Other than getting funding, which you just described, is there anything else we might get back, like comments or, like, and to the extent you could maybe just things we might see if we get comments from either the state or the federal?
We wouldn't see any federal comments, but we actually submit our plan to a special education advisor in the Bureau of Special Education. And if he sees any issues or compliance issues, he will respond to those, and he will ask us to correct them in the special education plan prior to the state using that to compile its own plan. I'm not sure of his turnaround time, because we're in a group of district called Phase 3 districts. There's quite a few of us. So at any one given point in time, the state may be reviewing 20 to 30 to 40 special education plans in a shot. Our special education advisor is excellent, and I expect that if he does see anything that requires a review, he would let us know immediately.
Can you just, when you went through the process, there'll be a notification to the public that the draft is available for comments? And
Yes.
how, will that be a letter sent out to the?
Yeah, well, we actually plan on not only posting it on the district's website, the plan is to create a one-page letter that can go home with families so that they are aware. And we were also tossing around the idea of how to inform community stakeholders. And that's something that the subcommittee wanted to speak about further, but suggestions included, advertising in the newspaper or perhaps posting it in libraries in the township building. But those are things that the subcommittee hadn't really hammered out at this point.
You should have known you'd be one step ahead of me, because I was going to suggest the libraries might be a place to put hard
Right.
copies. Great, thank you.
Sure.
I'm just wondering, in terms of like parent input into the process, I really appreciate that CSE is obviously so crucial in the process. But for the comprehensive plan, we have plans to reach out to parents and students as well. And I realize we're on a shorter timeline, and I'm not sure if the surveys that we could do for the comprehensive planning process might be able to address some of these issues as well. I don't know if it's, I know we've done a survey not that long ago with families, I think through CSE.
Yes, it was about 2 years ago.
Well, I've been doing this too long. I thought it was more recent. Okay, I don't know if that could be incorporated in, or potentially when we're doing the parent surveys and student surveys, if there could be questions that are addressed around the services that we're providing on special needs students, so that that's incorporated as well, even if not in this initial plan, into the comprehensive planning process.
So I would just say two things. One, if you go back to the slide that says executive summary, I mean, so many parts of this are compliance oriented, many parts. So, and it could certainly be influenced by what parents might offer to us, but it isn't direction setting in the same way that the comprehensive plan is direction setting. The fact that this plan, though, is posted is an opportunity for people to give additional input, and the committee will review that additional input. And then the last part is that, as you pointed out earlier, this is being submitted now, but it doesn't close the conversation about our approach to special education service delivery, our approach to evaluating students, our approach to supporting children with regular education services. That's a vibrant conversation that has to take place in the comprehensive planning process.
So I guess what I'm asking is that if, when we do the surveys, the student surveys and the teacher survey, you know, all of the different surveys, parent surveys, that we have questions that would get at those, you know, issues as well. So that, I don't think we need to do a separate survey, but to make sure that we're getting feedback from those constituents. Thanks. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank the members of the committee for the good work that they've been doing.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Really quickly, because Javon spoke a little bit about Chapter 4 regulations, and the State Board adopted, or I should say, published its Chapter 4 regulations on March 1st that talk about academic standards and assessments. I wanted to briefly share with the board some of the key components of that plan. I'm not sharing the entire plan. We can provide you access to that, but I wanted to at least speak to some of the areas that may have some curricular and programmatic impact on the direction of the district. So out of this revision of Chapter 4, we identified some 18 areas where we thought we'd give a little bit of information briefly, and some of the notes are in front of you in terms of what we're expecting on the first page. So we pulled out what we thought were some areas that we wanted to share, and areas that will require future conversation at this point as we think about the ways in which those legislative decisions will impact the direction of the district. So really quickly, you're aware that Common Core is no more in Pennsylvania, and they've moved to PEA core standards. So that's one part of the Chapter 4. The state consortium, the concern about joining a large national consortium like PARC and having assessments from grades 3 through 11 every year at the end of the course. The issue of privacy and where does that information go to. The state decided that they were not going to be part of a national consortium or create national assessments. Siobhan spoke briefly about the elimination of the state-prescribed strategic plan and the new process that's involved there. Keystones. There's legislation that requires or that makes recommendation for 5 keystones. So in addition to the literature, algebra, and biology that we're well aware of, there will be a composition in civics and government keystone that will be implemented. Of course, we hear there's an asterisk that says, depending on funding, but that's the direction. And unfortunately, what that does to school districts is it forces us to act because we're not sure and we don't want to wait. And that really is problematic in the sense that we move forward, we change course sequences, we provide professional learning experiences, and then the state tells us, thank you very much, by the way, we're not going to move forward in that particular direction. So nightmare is putting it lightly. They also changed the high school graduation requirements for the class of 2017 that identifies the three major components of graduation requirements. 2019, 2020 is when they will begin to implement the composition and civics and government keystones. Again, that is based on state funding. For the class of 2017, which is the conversation that we think about in terms of how do we value our senior experience, which we do. Will it look different? Will that be part of the comprehensive conversation? But to let you know that as the class of 2017, the state will no longer require that as a graduation requirement. It doesn't mean that districts are not at liberty to continue that particular practice, but it will not be required as a graduation. And of course, this goes without saying that there continues to be language making sure that students can graduate, meeting satisfactory progress developed by their IEP teams. There's also a notification that the board or boards have to adopt the new graduation policy within 6 months of it being published, so that will be a conversation that we will have in the near future. And in their infinite wisdom, they decided, just in case you didn't like the 5 keystones that we are going to implement, if you choose to, you can give these following keystones as well, voluntarily. So I don't know anyone's going to take them up on that, but if they have funding, they are going to provide keystones for geometry, U.S. history, algebra 2, chemistry, and world history. Those will not be graduation requirements. They will be up to a district to decide, wow, let's test our kids some more and give geometry. And there might be reasons for that. Not scratching it off, but nonetheless, it's voluntarily, and we'll engage in that conversation needs be. Project required for opt-out students. Now, this is where parents have the right to opt out of an assessment due to religious reasons. However, if they opt out, the student has to embark on a project-based assessment. The parents cannot invoke religious freedom to prevent them from taking that project-based assessment. There's going to be probably some litigation around that ruling, but nonetheless, the state has said that you can be exempt for religious reasons for the keystones, but once you say you're not taking the keystones, every student has to participate in the project-based assessment, which I'll talk a little bit at the last slide. Student transcripts, the state says with the start of 16-17 that keystone performance levels, meaning basic, below basic, proficient, advanced, should be or required to put on student transcripts moving forward. There is additional conversation that speaks to supplemental instruction, and that when a student fails to meet proficiency on a keystone, that there has to be supplemental instruction. And the conversation has been, well, could that student get that supplemental instruction in the class that they're sitting in or another class? It has to be separate and parcel from that particular lesson, which has obviously some staffing implications moving forward. Retaking of the keystones in project-based assessments. Chapter 4 delineates that if a student the student is given the opportunity to attempt the keystones twice before moving to a project-based assessment. However, that is very different for IEP students. After an IEP student fails to meet proficiency on the keystone, the IEP team can convene and decide that the project-based is the most appropriate manner in which to move, and the student doesn't have to sit for a second round of the keystone assessment. But if without that, the state requires that students have 2 attempts before they move into the project-based assessment. At our next curriculum committee of the board meeting, we are going to unpack the project-based assessment and what that looks like. It is extremely problematic in terms of funding, in terms of staffing, in terms of scheduling, because there's very specific protocols to follow. Students have to have a tutor, and there's a lot of things that we need to put into place very soon to support our students, especially those students that, if they do have an IEP and they have not passed, it is up to the IEP team to determine whether or not they move into that project-based. And there is a possibility that those students could move into a project-based assessment over the summer. So we need to prepare for what that might look like. And I also want to, my last point, project-based assessment. Let me dispel the myth. It is not a project. Students go on the computer, they log on, and they answer a series of questions as though it was an online assessment. I'm not really sure why the state calls it a project-based assessment, but you log on with your username, your password, and they provide you a series of questions based on the module that you did not pass. So it's not necessarily a portfolio, it's not some experiential learning experience that they put together. It is a web-based correct answer, not correct answer type of assessment, and I'm not sure why they put the word project in front of it, because it is an online assessment. So I apologize for being so quick, but I wanted, because of the release on March 1st, wanted to give you a really brief overview of those implications and the work that lies ahead for us in terms of staffing, in terms of professional learning experiences for our staff. And we will continue to look at each of those components and think about ways to be a lot more strategic and better prepare for some of these initiatives. Any questions about that I can answer?
I actually have a question.
Sure.
Which, some of these things are obviously already happening, right?
Yes.
But are some of them, say, beginning of class of 2017. So the special education students satisfactorily complete program developed by IEP team in order to graduate. That seems like a big change. Am I correct about that?
Well, that was reclarification that students can graduate on IEP goals, and the idea that the team would have to put together a program to ensure that they've met satisfactory progress.
So that isn't something entirely new to what
No,
we're
that
doing?
is not. That is not new.
Okay. Okay.
Some of these legislations are clarifications or continued work that has taken place, but that is not new.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Or?
I had a question, Dr. Marseille, around the project-based assessment or online assessment
Yes.
from the state. Have you had an opportunity, or the team had an opportunity, to look at what those questions might be and practice examples, those kinds of things, so we have a sense of what to expect?
Yes, yes, we have. We've had 2 separate meetings with Kimberly Frazier, our supervisor of secondary special education, Rich Martin, our guidance, and our secondary supervisors in STEM and humanities. And part of that conversation, and Brian Cody with regards to data, is thinking about the best way in which to support students who might opt into the project base who have an IEP. And we need to address that immediately, as they might have an option of moving forward and deciding that the IEP team might say, you know what, we're not sitting for a second. This is not appropriate or conducive for this particular student, and we might move into a project base. And in order to do that, the state requires multiple layers of supports. The student has to have a tutor, and they use that term very loosely, so we have to identify what does that look like. Those sessions can happen before school, during school, after school, so it's very unclear in terms of how we're going to move forward. We can provide supports over the summer as well, but we wanted to make sure that if that was an option exercised by the IEP team, we were ready to support that particular student or group of students in the summer.
And then regular ed students have the option if they are not successful 2 times.
Regular education students will sit for the keystones twice before moving
Okay.
into the project-based.
Now, do we have a sense of the number of students that we might need to accommodate when we start to think about staffing implications? Any
Well-
ballparks? And I know that's kind of way ahead, but just a sense of the number of students.
Well, we currently have less than a dozen students right now
Okay.
who could be impacted over the summer.
Okay.
To if the IEP team were to move forward and decide this is the most appropriate measure for that particular student. But we haven't unpacked the large numbers in terms of next year. Our meeting next week with the schedulers, because we did meet with the high school schedulers, and what we asked them to do is, based on our last year's performance, could you create a mock schedule
Yeah.
of what that would look like if these students receive the support services during the school day, and what would be the staffing implications for that? So we're following up next week for that particular analysis.
And then that'll come to curriculum committee of the board.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
next
We'll
meeting.
review that, and we'll be prepared to not only give you a lot more specific information about the project, but tell you what we put together as recommendations for moving forward.
Great, thank you.
Could you describe a student that would not pass the Keystone but would pass a project-based assessment? Just like, what would that look like for the student?
Well, part of the project-based assessment requires, so you take the Keystone, you're on your own. There's no one looking through your documents to ensure that it's ready for submission. It's like any standardized test. You submit that. Student does not perform well, and if that student is an IEP student, the second time, if the IEP team convenes, he or she can sit for a project-based. Part of the requirement that the state says is that that particular student has to have a tutor. That tutor helps that particular student throughout the exam. So a student goes to answer question number 1. Students having difficulty and not sure how to answer question 1. The session stops. That tutor then provides remediation for that skill. That student logs back on again, looks at the question and answers it, and if they believe they've gotten appropriate remediation, they answer it. And they continue to do that. So each time a student has the option of stopping, asking for support, stopping. That can go every question, every 5th question, the entire assessment. And after that assessment, if the student says, I think I'm ready to submit, the tutor then reviews that project-based. And the tutor then determines whether or not that student appears to be making satisfactory progress and it's ready to be submitted. And at that point, the tutor can say, you know, Wagner, I think you need a little bit more time working on a couple of these questions. We're not ready to submit. I'm going to provide additional remediation on this particular skill set. And then when student, tutor are confident that that's ready for submission, student hits send. It goes to PDE, and there's a panel of 3 or 4 individuals who will review that assessment, score it, and send it back. So it could be a 2-week tutoring process, it could be a 6-week tutoring process, or it could be a year, depending on the type of support that student needs and how that student feels comfortable in moving forward.
And just so the board doesn't worry, could you just identify how much money the state is giving us for the additional tutoring?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you that. That is 0.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Dr. Marseille. Okay, so we're done with the presentation? Okay, perfect. All right. At this point, I'd like to ask if there's anyone in the audience who would like to ask a question or make a comment on any issue. Please come and sign in with Ms. LaPera. Please state your name and where you live, and you have a 3-minute time limit. Actually, if anyone's interested, could you please sign up now, and then that way we have an idea. Great.
My name is Lorraine Carter. I live in Ardmore. I have a question. As a former Committee for Special Education board member, I know that although they're far-reaching, they don't reach every parent or family who has an IEP or a 504 or even a GIEP. So I was wondering if, in your outreach process, what your plan is to involve any of those parents, if there is a plan to involve them specifically. So I'm wondering, curious as to what, or actually more specifically, if every parent of a child with an IEP, a 504, maybe even a GIEP, will be notified of the process so that they are very well aware, rather than relying solely on CSE or CARE or something like that to get the word out. I was just curious about that.
So I don't know if Dr. Marseille wants to talk about the outreach for comprehensive planning. The special education plan as a draft will certainly be posted, and every parent in the district who has any child in the district with any kinds of supports will be notified about that. But the group of people that are being engaged in the comprehensive planning process will certainly include parents with kids with IEPs and 504s and GIEPs. So we're not just relying on CSE as the only voice.
That's correct. We have been trying to be very deliberate in opening up the doors in terms of allowing voices to take place, and that's why we've had focus meetings, which is why it is an open forum where when we have focus conversations in terms of what do you see are the challenges the district faces 10 years from now, and individuals have the opportunity to engage in a myriad of conversations. One of the areas that we know as a district we need to continue working on is providing supports for our students with special needs. So that's never a conversation that's gone lost, and that will continue to be a big focus as we move into the next phase of the plan. You're looking to follow up. I see that in your face.
I appreciate the comments you've just made, but I'm wondering, is there anything specific other than what's been mentioned tonight that's in the plan to make sure that every parent of a child who has an IEP? So if we typically have 1,000 families that have an IEP every year, at least for the last decade plus, we have several hundred who have a 504. Aside from for example, would a letter go out to every parent, or would every special education teacher be informed, let the parent know, or anything like that? Something where you can specifically touch base with a parent. One of the things I'm concerned about, especially as well, in addition to all of that, is the disproportionate number of African American students who are in special education. I think it would be really wonderful if all of those parents were specifically targeted to know, as well as any other parent and family of those who would be directly impacted by these changes. So aside from presuming that they may be exposed to some of the outlets that you're outreaching to, I'm saying that I doubt all of these families are, and particularly on a consistent basis.
We are sending a letter to all parents.
Right. I heard that about the comprehensive piece.
Okay.
So
We're sending a letter out about the special education plan as well.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mike Salmonson, Narberth. I was a member of the curriculum committee, the elementary school curriculum committee, and I came here primarily tonight to sing Dr. Doria's praises. I know those of you on the curriculum committee already heard them, but we went in with a lot of baggage and a lot of history. She had none of it, and to say she spent hours and hours in the committee is to really understate. She spent hours and hours with me personally on the phone, and I know very many other animated members.
You're
of
not
the
going to let
committee
us resist making a comment about that, Mike, are you?
I think to Ms. Ackman's point, the Facebook boards have already lit up about the letter, and those of us on the Parents Committee have already tried to respond to it. I think it's a great idea that each of the HSAs try and have a meeting, and I think the parents who are on that committee really need to make a point, whether it's at our own schools or even going to the other schools, not to just have the principals present, but to try and have parents and administrators and teachers who are on the committee present as well, because I think it's really important that they understand that there was a buy-in from all the stakeholders as a whole. And I'm certainly willing to do it at my own school and any other school that would have me. But to that end, I also want to make sure that the parents don't get forgotten in these last few things that we need to do to get across the finish line. In terms of the social studies piece and the science piece, I don't know that the entire committee needs to meet with that, but I would like some parental involvement as we get to that finish line, and I'd like the board to consider some mechanism for that. Probably foolish to say I'm volunteering for that, but you could probably have guessed that, and I'm sure there are others as well. And just to the writing point, I think just to amplify what Dr. Doria said, what we noticed was that there's a lot of, we heard the phrase learn to write and then write to learn. And it seemed like as you moved along in the process, there was a little bit dropping off of the learning to write piece. And there was no consistency across the school. So what we were really hoping is that there's sort of a consistent writing program in the development of the different types of ways that we write. It was very clear, it was very deliberate at some of the schools, less so than others, where teachers had a lot more freedom to sort of develop writing. And so we wanted to see that in a consistent way. And I know one of you raised that in particular, so that's just to amplify that point. Again, I think the group as a whole was a great model for future engagement. The difference between what we saw last spring versus what came out this fall was pretty remarkable, and I hope you guys recognize that and use it in the future.
Mike, I just want to say thank you again for participating in the process, and I think it was a good process, and we've had parents participating in like the safety task force and the technology task force, so I think this has shown again that this is a good model, and I think we'll be continuing that model as we move forward. And I just want to say, I'm sorry, also with Lorraine as well, making suggestions. Both Mike and Lorraine had suggestions for ways we could reach out to to parents to be more effective communicators, and I think certainly we're open to that. And if you have suggestions on how to better reach families, then please let us know.
Could I just add one comment, or no?
You could come to a communications meeting? Go ahead, if you'd like to say it.
I just wanted to clarify that the special education plan that was just discussed, that does not include gifted education, because I got a little confused. And so it is just special education. So I just wanted to say that for the record. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Ruth Jenkins?
Yeah, I'm sorry, and let me just clarify
sorry.
that, as Ms. Savage indicated, that this meets a federal requirement, and so the gifted education is not federal law, it's gifted education is state law. Yeah.
So that would be in the strategic plan?
Yes.
Not this first?
Correct.
Okay. I
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure you said that.
Thank you, and clarification's great, so thank you. Ms. Jenkins, please go ahead.
Okay. I just returned from spring training in Florida. It's very cold there. It's not, but I did take a couple of my students out of school, my grandchildren, because they're very good at figuring out batting practice, batting averages, and I thought that was a good math experience, and they did their homework. Two things about I have actually four things, so I'm going to talk quickly tonight. One is the Keystone test with that strange tutor activity going on. Are there going to be practice tests? I know that when we used to take the Regents exams in New York, we had practice tests that we could take throughout the year, preparing us for the final exam. And that maybe some of these students who are not doing as well should not be identified at graduation, but maybe should be identified a little bit earlier in terms of their test-taking ability. As far as the science and social studies, was always a hard thing to integrate that. But I found that by integrating those subjects into the other subjects, into writing and into music, that we got a fuller picture. So for instance, studying the Civil War, the students would read The Red Badge of Courage. They would know the story of John Brown and know the song of John Brown's Body. They would also, in science, understand that this was an industrial revolution, and they were also building the sewing machine and the cotton gin. And George Washington Carver had come to develop the peanut. There are so many things that can be put together in a more integrated, rather than separating everything out and not knowing that all these things happened around the same time. I always found that a very exciting way of teaching, more of a humanistic approach. I also was interested in transitioning some of the special education students into regular classrooms throughout the day or periodically, or having some of the non-special education students be part of the special education activity, so they get to know each other, that they're not so separated throughout their school experience, and know that they're real people. And the one other thing I just wanted to mention was I'm very excited about the extended kindergarten day, and I hope that it becomes more than just a pilot. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to address the Keystone practice issue, just for practice test issue?
If I remember the question correctly, there is no practice assessment provided by the state. There's diagnostics that we provide for students in preparation to see where they might fall within the Keystones, but those are also deeply embedded in the formative assessments that we give throughout the course of the year. But once they do not meet proficiency and they move into that project-based is a sort of a one-to-one walkthrough of the questions. It's really guided for them.
Okay. And I appreciate your sharing of the planning thematic units across curricular areas. That was a discussion that did take place a number of different times at the committee, and it's a discussion that takes place at the school. We share your your enthusiasm for that model. Just want to make sure that you're clear for the record. Students with IEPs are in regular education classes for the vast majority of time, and so the model here that has been in place for a long time has children with IEPs in those classes. There are small numbers of kids who receive more of their services, but it's really small numbers of kids who receive more of their services in a special education class. And at some point we can certainly share statistically what kind of time is spent by the numbers of kids in the aggregate, not about individual kids. So the walls between regular and special education here are very low, and kids are with one another in various instructional settings. And in most classrooms you would go in, you wouldn't know who has an IEP and who does not.
Ms. Blunt?
Oh, hi. Crystal Blunt Ardmore. My question was around that project-based testing that you could opt out to take. And I guess my concern, since some of our students are, some of our students have those IEPs, and I guess my concern is taking an exam like that. Is the plan to make sure that their IEP is aligned with the, like the Pennsylvania standards for when they take that exam? Just because I'm thinking past high school into college, and what does that look like for those students who are struggling to take the exam and they don't pass it twice, so now they have to do this project-based assessment just to graduate, and what all that entails and what that might look like for someone who wants to go to college or college bound.
Yeah, it is extremely frustrating in terms of the way in which they orchestrated this alternative assessment. And we are working to determine what's the most appropriate way to support students. So if we do currently have standard-based IEPs, if I'm not mistaken, and part of the special ed team's responsibility is taking multiple factors into consideration. And there's a lot of factors involved, and one is really test anxiety in terms of having students to sit down and over and over again work on a problem until they get it right is extremely frustrating. So when the IEP team convenes and feels that based on the factors that we're going to identify to think about whether or not they should move to a project-based, that is going to be part of that student's IEP in terms of ensuring that they get obviously the appropriate level of support for that. And we don't agree with the project-based assessment. We think it's really not well thought out. It's not even a project. And we are concerned that we will have large number of students who we continue to overtest because PDE and the State Department hasn't really figured out their game plan yet, and our kids are victims of that. So we are keenly aware and trying as best as possible to make that experience not as frightening as it's been for some students who have to sit for these particular types of assessments.
I guess I'm thinking, yeah, the anxiety piece, but I'm more concerned about the skill piece too.
The project-based is standard-based, so it is aligned to PDE standards. So if the questions are asked are aligned to eligible content, so if they choose a correct answer, then they'll meet proficiency.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are a lot of parts of this model that we're not comfortable with and that we need to sort through. There are also parts of the model that the state has tried to implement in the past. So I know that you've also always been diligent in terms of expressing your concern, not just that kids get into college, but that they're successful once they get there. To the extent that we're clear about the targets, like everyone has to have these skills, that's good. You know, that's the good part of the assessment. The other problem that I see in this, and one that the state never has actually implemented before, but they keep saying they will, and this time it's the Keystone exams, before it's the PSSA, is putting this data on transcripts, which they say is going to happen in the 16-17 school year. That presents all kinds of issues because we have many students who do well academically and do not test well. And so now to offer up data for some, need of the state to report federally that contradicts the fact that a student has earned A's and B's in a subject but is below basic when they sit for that particular assessment presents a college access issue and disadvantages kids from Pennsylvania because other states don't require that.
Because it hampered my oldest
Correct.
daughter when they reported those kind of things on her transcripts. Then there were colleges where she
Right.
got into, but it was contingent upon that she have summer remedial classes just because of those reports and looking at the course selections and stuff like that. So it's
We share that
concern.
concern, and I know there are other people in the community that share concerns about the testing models that the state is implementing now, and hopefully that will get altered as it has in the past around the reporting things on transcripts.
all right. Thank you.
Okay, I think there wasn't anyone else who signed up, right? Yes, okay. All right, well, thank you, everyone, and with that, we're adjourned.